Hey everyone, Mr. Sujano here. In today's video, we're taking a look at the MiSTer and determining whether or not it's worth it. Let's get started. Alright, to kick things off, the MiSTer is an open source hardware project designed at replicating retro PCs, game consoles, and arcades using FPGA. The project is specifically based around the DE-10 Nano. If you want to learn more about FPGA, I've got you covered with a video in the description below. Now, the MiSTer project is actually a fork of the old MIST project. The MI came from Amiga, and the ST came from the Atari ST. Put them together and you get MIST. And the MiSTer here has an extra ER. The ER stands for Subscribe to Mr. Sujano. Now, setting up a MiSTer is a very interesting process. Some people might like it and some people might really hate it. You have to worry about more than just the operating system and configuring things here. You also have to set up the hardware. It's kind of like building a very simple PC. There are a bunch of different options available, ranging from expensive to more expensive, a relatively simple build versus a more robust build. And it all starts here with the DE-10 Nano. In addition to the DE-10 Nano, if you're going for an expensive but basic setup, you could pick up something like the micro USB hub here, some RAM, a heatsink, and a case, and try to call it a day. On the flip side here, you can get a little bit more fancy, I'd argue a lot more practical, but it would come at a cost. For example, you can pick up an I/O standard with heatsink and fan for it, and that will give you the ability to plug your MiSTer right into a CRT. You can get a MiSTer Cade here to make it compatible with JAMA. Now, the biggest frustration that I had with the MiSTer, being candid here, is the fact that I couldn't find parts available all at the same time. Due to the current chip shortages and supply chain issues, sourcing parts for the MiSTer was a bit of a headache. I could find parts that popped up here and there, but I'd have to pay for shipping at all the individual locations. Costs added up very quickly. It got very expensive very fast. So I waited here until the MiSTer pre-configured bundle with everything that I wanted included in it came up for sale at $495, and I picked it up. It was not cheap. The pre-configured bundle had almost everything I wanted in it. I was debating on a couple of different things here, but this to me was a pretty darn good start. It's got the aluminum passively cooled case. There is no fan, it's silent. It's very similar to the Flirt case on a Raspberry Pi. The DE-10 Nano, which you absolutely need. 128 megabytes of RAM. You can go with less if you want, but if you want to play Neo Geo games, you do need 128 megs. I got the standard I/O board, so I can plug it into a CRT if I wanted, and I can also plug it into an HDMI at the same time. It comes with a USB hub, bracket, splitter, and switch. The ADC in, which is audio tape, which I don't really need, but it's nice to have. The real-time clock, a power supply, and a micro SD card. I really didn't need the micro SD card, but it's nice that it's in there. Shipping was surprisingly quick. The first thing I see here when I opened up the package is the barrel plug adapter. This goes into the power supply as well as into the MiSTer. It also has a nice power switch. Next up here is the other half to the power supply. For those curious, here are the certifications on the back, and the output on this is 5 volt and 2 amp. Next up in the box here is the MiSTer itself, and it's already pre-assembled. I went with a dark gray color. I could have got gold, purple, or black. I just really like the dark gray. Taking a look at the first side of the MiSTer, we can see 2 micro SD card slots. One of them already has a micro SD card in it. We've got 3 USB ports and audio in, as well as an on-off switch for that top I/O. On the back of the MiSTer, we have an Ethernet port, a mini USB port, a USB host, as well as another USB port. On the other side of the MiSTer, we have 3 USB ports on the bottom that can be used for controllers. On the top, we have another USB port, and that's for user I/O. And then on the back or the front of the MiSTer, depending on how you're looking at this, we have our analog video out. You can plug that into a CRT. We've got our Toslink line out, our 2 power ports there at the HDMI out, the debug port, that's a mini USB, as well as another USB port for power only. On the bottom here, we have some rubber feet as well as some branding. On the top of the case, it was a little bit hard to capture here because of the color of the case and the color of the printing, but there are 3 LEDs and 3 physical buttons. The LEDs are labeled power, disk, and user. The buttons are labeled Reset, OSD, which brings up the menu, and User. I brightened up this image just to give you a better picture here of the LEDs as well as the buttons. And fun fact here, the MiSTer is super easy to mod. I had already modded this within the first 5 minutes of opening it up. Here is the before and here is the after. This is pretty impressive. Booting the MiSTer up here, and mine is already configured with an operating system as well as a bunch of different cores for consoles, PC systems, as well as arcades. MiSTer's UI here is ugly. The main menu could look a lot better here. I'm not going to hide that fact at all, but it is functional and it is useful. There are some useful utilities as well. Interestingly enough here, there's a scripts section with some really cool stuff in it. For example, connecting to a Wi-Fi network, your Google Drive for saves, as well as updating the MiSTer itself. A lot of people have said the MiSTer is confusing, but if you're familiar with emulation at all, familiar with RetroArch or anything like that, you should be right at home here. One of the first things I did here was clone the initial micro SD card so I could tinker around with the settings without really breaking anything, and that way I had a nice backup in case something went sideways. I threw some ROMs on here just to see how this thing would work. Changing settings up in game was pretty simple and straightforward. They have different audio settings, different video settings. You can change your aspect ratios, apply filters, and even apply cheats. And fortunately here, cheats were automatically built in, ready to go. Getting to the main menu here in game was really simple and straightforward. You press select and down at the same time, or you can press the physical button right on the MiSTer itself. I had a lot of fun tinkering around in the menu systems to try out different things, and I did notice though that not every game is set up perfectly. You will have to take some time and tinker around with your settings to make sure everything is just right. I tried a number of different cores out and I tried a number of different games out, and I really didn't run into any issues at all. I was pretty happy with the performance of this. To me, it seemed pretty close to the original hardware. Although I really didn't run into any issues here, the support community for the MiSTer seems pretty good. I was browsing the forums, taking a look at their Discord. Everybody seemed pretty responsive and helpful when someone had an issue. In addition to all of that, the MiSTer has some pretty active development going on behind the scenes. Different cores are being updated, there are different system settings being updated, and it is really easy to stay up to date. There is a built-in updating script right into the main OS for the MiSTer, but I found a very helpful one here called Update All. You have to manually add it in, and I do recommend checking it out. Now, I purchased my MiSTer from MiSTer Add-ons, but there are some different shops available here. For example, Ultimate MiSTer FPGA, as well as Zero himself. So let's get into what I like, what I don't like, and whether or not I think the MiSTer is worth it. And we'll start out here with what I like. First and foremost, I love how fun this project is. Whether you go with a pre-configured bundle or a DIY solution, you'll probably have a good time putting it together if you're into stuff like that. I also like configuring the software on it. It is ugly, it's got an ugly UI, but at the same time it is very functional. Setting things up and even adding things was simple, easy, and straightforward, and there is a ton of support if you need it. I found the gameplay on the MiSTer to be very accurate. I tried out a number of different cores and it seemed pretty darn close to the original, although software emulation has gotten to the point where it's also extremely darn close to the original. I think in some cases you might be splitting hairs to see the difference between software emulation and your traditional emulators and what the MiSTer can do. I did find though that the audio from the MiSTer was incredible. And just for reference here, there were a number of reasons why I picked up the MiSTer, but there was one very specific reason why I picked it up, one very specific use case. And that was to be able to use it instead of my arcade hardware. This is the MiSTer right beside a CPS2 board for comparison. You can see the size difference. To play a CPS2 game on your TV, you also need a super gun as well as all of the cables. It's very bulky, it's not the best to set up, and on top of that, it's very expensive. This is a much cheaper option. Now, a lot of you probably already know this, but I'm involved in the fighting game community. I've been to tournaments, I've competed in tournaments, and I've played against a lot of top players, both competitively and casually. And I can say this, a lot of top players can easily tell if they're playing on an emulator or if they're playing on real hardware. They'll know if they're playing on MAME, they'll know if they're playing on Final Burn Alpha or Final Burn Neo. And that is because they rely on frame-perfect setups. They have trained for hundreds of hours, if not thousands of hours, doing very specific things in the game. They'll know if the game timing is off, they'll know if animations are off, they'll know if the latency is off, and it's very easy for them to pick up. The MiSTer here hopefully presents an opportunity to help bridge the gap between emulation and the real deal. Now moving into things I don't like about the MiSTer. First and foremost here is the cost of entry. Picking up a MiSTer, picking up everything you need, getting set up is not cheap. it will set you back a couple of $100 at the bare minimum, and that will turn a lot of people away, considering emulation for the most part is free. If you have an Android device, you can go to the Google Play Store, download a bunch of emulators, have a great time with them at no cost. If you wanted to pick up a Raspberry Pi, you can pick up one of those for really cheap in comparison with a MiSTer. And RetroPie has pretty much everything you need on it as well. The second thing I don't like about the MiSTer, and I wanted to mention this about the kit I picked up, has to deal with the case. Now the case itself is amazing, but there's one thing I don't like about it, and that is the main micro SD card slot. It's very difficult to put in a micro SD card in there and also to take it out. It's recessed just a little bit too much. The third thing I don't like here, this one is super subjective and also highly debatable, but I don't like how primitive the MiSTer feels. To me, the DE-10 Nano here just feels outdated. It's not, but it feels old. On top of that, the menu UI here is horrible. In my opinion, it just seems super outdated. It's very functional, but at the same time here, it's pretty ugly. The very last thing I don't like about the MiSTer doesn't really have to deal with the hardware at all. It's more of the polarizing opinions that surround it. There is a lot of toxicity out there. A lot of people saying, you know what, the MiSTer is the best thing ever. It's super accurate. Software emulators can never be as good. That is wrong. There are also people out there saying, you know what, software emulation is the best, the MiSTer sucks. That is also wrong. It's almost like there's a bit of console wars going on here, and to me, that's absolutely not necessary at all. The MiSTer is emulation, it's hardware emulation, and traditional emulators are software emulation. They are two sides to the exact same coin. They go about things differently, but the end result is emulation of the original hardware. So let's get into whether or not I recommend a MiSTer, and the answer here is I do recommend one, and I also don't recommend one. I don't recommend picking up a MiSTer if you don't need one. If you don't know if you need one or not, you probably don't need one. There are a lot of amazing free emulators out there on PC, on your phone. If you've got a Raspberry Pi, heck, that's a lot cheaper than a MiSTer. If you don't necessarily need to spend all this money for a MiSTer and you don't know why you would, then you probably don't need a MiSTer. This is one emulation option out of many that are out there, and there are a lot of free options out there and you can save your money. On top of that, just a quick note as well, if you plan on emulating the Nintendo Switch or 3DS or GameCube or PS2 or basically anything above the original PlayStation, you probably won't be able to do that with the MiSTer. The hardware is just simply not powerful enough. They are working on a PlayStation core, but that is even pushing the system. On the other hand here, I do recommend picking up a MiSTer if you have a specific use case for it. If you've looked at a MiSTer, you're intrigued by it, you're interested by it, and it looks like a lot of fun, well then heck yes, pick one up. It's a lot of money, so you'd be prepared to be spending for it. But at the same time too, it's a really great community, a lot of great people in there, and you might have a lot of fun. I mean, if this is up your alley and this is your hobby, well then absolutely yes. A lot of retro gamers out there have some very unique and specific needs, and the MiSTer might be able to accomplish what you're looking for here fairly easily. And if you collect arcade hardware, if you work with arcade hardware, well the MiSTer here, priced at $495 for the kit, that is extremely cheap in comparison with the price of some of this arcade stuff. At the end of the day here, I'm a big fan of the MiSTer. I think it's neat, I think it's cool, and I think it's interesting. If you're interested in the MiSTer at all, I'd recommend picking up the pre-configured bundle. It's about 10 to 15 bucks more expensive than sourcing out those parts yourself, but you don't have to worry about sourcing out the parts, finding out their availability, shipping them from different areas. It's just all nicely located in one nice, easy bundle. It'll save you a massive headache. Anyways, that is all I've got for this one. I tried to make it short and sweet to the point, all stuff and no fluff. I could really talk about this stuff for hours. Let me know your thoughts about the MiSTer in the comments below. What do you like about it? What don't you like about it? Let me know in the comments below. If you like this video, leave a like. If you didn't like this video, leave a like. Hit that subscribe button, check out my other videos. Don't tempt fate, save your state.